The Bible's story is a beautiful tale that has shaped the world into what it is today. In this video, we will be looking at the complete story of the Bible, starting from the Genesis scriptures through the history of the nation of Israel, the life of Jesus Christ, the ministry and death of the apostles, and the revelation of John. This peculiar journey will leave you intrigued by the wonder and faith discussed throughout the Bible. With God as the all-existent force in the world, the uncreated creator and the source of life, there is no mention of his beginning, as there is no beginning without him. The Bible begins with God creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh day from all his creations. After the creation of the earth and all living beings, God made man on the sixth day. Adam was called and named all creatures as a special creation unto God, made in God's very image and likeness. God fashioned a woman from Adam's rib to be his wife, Eve, the first female and mother of all creation. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit because the enemy of God deceived them, the fallen angel known as Satan was the source of evil in the world. Adam and Eve ate the fruit God told them not to eat, and because of this they were cast out from the Garden of Eden, which God made for them at the beginning of time, to instead toil diligently on the earth and become cursed for their sake. God also promised that a seed from Eve would arise to bruise the head of the serpent, or Satan, an early mention of the Messiah, who would appear many years later in the pages of the Bible. While in the open world, Adam and Eve had 2 children, the first Cain and the second Abel. Cain, out of jealousy against his brother, who offered a more pleasing sacrifice of his herd to God, committed the first recorded murder in the world by killing his brother. God punished him by cursing him for being a wanderer throughout the world. After leaving God's presence, Cain was the first man to build a city named after his son Enoch. Adam and Eve will have a third son, Seth, whose descendants will form the foundations of the human population, a population that grew large and evil in the sight of God, leading God to desire to erase the human world. But among them were righteous people like Enoch, who never saw death but was translated directly to heaven by God for his righteousness. He leaves only a man named Noah and his family as the sole survivors of his judgment. Noah was chosen because of his righteousness in God's sight, and he was instructed to build an ark that would preserve his family and 2 of every living creature on the face of the earth when God brought a mighty flood upon the whole world. After this judgment took place, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, formed the foundations of the new world after the flood. After Noah's death, men continued in their wicked ways, which made God desire a man with whom he would establish a covenant of righteousness and priesthood on the face of the earth. The man found was Abram, whom God changed and named Abraham, father of many nations, highlighting his promise to Abraham to bless the entire world through his lineage. Although Abraham and his wife Sarah were old, Abraham believed in God. He eventually had a son named Isaac, who was old. Isaac would have 2 sons, Esau, the father of the people of Edom, and Jacob, who would become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. God named Jacob Israel, the chosen one to inherit his covenant with Abraham and Jacob. One of the 12 sons of Jacob, named Joseph, would be sold into slavery in Egypt by his brothers. While in Egypt, Joseph would rise through the ranks, eventually becoming the prime minister of all of Egypt, and through him, all of Israel would be brought to Egypt to get nourishment when famine came upon the whole land. After some time, the children of Israel became slaves in Egypt, enduring great hardship until a prophet named Moses was sent to deliver them 430 years later. Moses was originally born to the enslaved Israelites, but he was rescued by the daughter of Egypt's ruler, Pharaoh, and raised as a prince of Egypt. Moses would grow up to know his true identity, and after killing an Egyptian, he escaped Egypt only to be sent back by God to bring back the Israelites and lead them to the land of Canaan. Their deliverance is noted in the Bible as the Exodus, when Moses and Aaron, his brother, led 2 million Hebrews out of Egypt through the deserts and across the Red Sea. A journey that would last for 40 years instead of 3 months as it should, all because of the disobedience of the Israelites. All the members of the generation that left Egypt will die in the desert, and only Joshua and Caleb will make it to the promised land because only they, amongst their generation, believed in God. Only these two and the children of the previous generation would make it to the land of Canaan. Eventually, Israel settled in the land of Canaan, driving out 7 nations in total, nations that God desired to punish for their wickedness and idolatry. Israel was ruled by judges like Samson, Deborah, and Gideon for some time, until they requested a king in the days of the prophet Samuel, as documented in the first book of Samuel. The first king chosen would be Saul, whose later years were disobedience to God. Saul's kingship over Israel was taken from him and given to David, whom God described as a man after his own heart. Through David's lineage, kings like Solomon, who would be blessed with divine wisdom and riches, and the first king to build God a temple in Israel, Hezekiah, who would serve God as David did, and Josiah would all arise. God even promised David that the Messiah, the Savior who would restore the whole world to God and save man from his sins, would come from his lineage. But despite God's promise, the children of Israel would abandon God and fall into sin and idolatry, as noted in the books of Kings and Chronicles, leading to God's judgment, which saw several powerful nations like Babylon, Assyria, and Persia take Israel captive. Prophets will arise to warn Israel of this looming judgment, but they would always refuse to give listening ears to these men. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Elijah, and Elisha are notable prophets who spoke before Israel's captivity in Babylon. Jeremiah is the only major prophet alive during the fulfillment of these words. During their captivity in Babylon and Persia, prophets like Daniel and Ezekiel rose to speak on God's behalf, as documented in the books named after them. Also, prophets like Isaiah and Zechariah gave prophecies about the coming Messiah and the restoration of Israel. This inspired people like Mordecai and Esther to keep believing in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob during captivity in foreign nations. Eventually, men like Ezra and Nehemiah will rise to lead the Israelites back into the land of Israel and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, fulfilling the prophecy of Israel's deliverance out of captivity, with the prophecy of the Messiah remaining unfulfilled. The last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, ended with a prophecy of a forerunner who would appear to prepare the way of the Messiah before his arrival to save the world. The 4 books or Gospels of the New Testament speak of the ministry of Jesus, who was born of the Virgin Mary and raised by a man named Joseph as his son. John the Baptist, the forerunner who was prophesied, announced Jesus and identified Jesus as the Messiah during the baptism of Christ. After his baptism, Jesus became a great figure who declared himself the Son of God and performed miracles across the new Roman-occupied territory of Israel called Judea, healing the sick and raising the dead wherever he went. Jesus continued to preach his message of repentance and goodwill alongside his 12 disciples until he was arrested and trialed by the Pharisees and the Roman authorities. In this event, he was found guilty and crucified. After 3 days, he rose from the grave. After many signs and appearances, he commissioned his disciples, now apostles, to go and preach the good news, a message of belief in Jesus as the only way to God through his sacrifice on the cross. The book of Acts shows the ministry of the apostles of Jesus and the early movement of Christianity as the gospel is preached worldwide, despite many persecutions and tribulations. Among those who persecuted the message of Christ was a man named Saul, also known as Paul, despite his terror against the early church. Paul was called into ministry after an encounter with Jesus on his way to the city of Damascus on a mission to persecute Christians. Paul was commissioned as an apostle to the Gentiles, taking the message of Christ outside Jerusalem to places like Rome, Ephesus, Galatia, Thessalonica, and many others. Many of Paul's writings to these churches and persons form a large part of the New Testament. Paul was eventually arrested and killed in Rome for his teachings. The apostles, one by one, were killed for their message, starting with Apostle James, who was killed in Jerusalem. His death led to the scattering of believers across the known world. Peter, called the Rock by Christ, died in Rome and was named the first pope by the Catholic Church. He was to be crucified like Jesus, but during his execution he asked that his cross be turned upside down as he was unworthy to die as Christ did. Andrew was killed in Greece and hanged on an X-shaped cross for his teachings. Nathanael was arrested, beaten, skinned alive, and then beheaded in Armenia, where he preached the gospel. Thomas, who took the gospel to faraway India, was stabbed with a spear during a sermon, and many others died for the faith in equally horrific circumstances. All 12 disciples died for the work except Judas Iscariot, who hanged himself due to the guilt of betraying Jesus, and one other disciple who was saved alive for a great work. The second disciple not killed by persecution was Apostle John, known as John the Beloved, who survived death despite many persecutions. During one of the attempts of the Roman authorities to end John's life, he was exiled to the island of Patmos to die of starvation, where John encountered a revelation of the end times and the world to come, which he documented in the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible. After writing this book, John lived the rest of his life in Ephesus, where he died of old age. Today, the Bible is the most published and circulated book in world history, and its adherents are the largest of any religion. It is a fitting position for a book with such extraordinary history and content. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end of today's video. If you want to dive deeper into the incredible lives of the 12 disciples, don't miss our next video, where we uncover their stories, sacrifices, and legacies.